Good evening, Credit Unionists. I'm Alan.hignett of Hay Credit Union, and welcome to tonight's virtual engagement, a fireside chat on the subject of diversity, equality, inclusion. July 2022 marks the return of the World Council of Credit Unions to Glasgow. To prepare, the North East Humber ABCUL Forum are organising a series of webinars engaging with the UK and international thought leaders within the worldwide credit union movement. Today, successful businesses are weaving diversity, equality and inclusion into their culture. They're not shying away from difficult conversations that may arise, discussing this subject with open dialogue. The biggest challenge in dismantling racist and biased systems is getting people who aren't directly affected to not only care, but to be proactive in creating equal and unified communities. Many people are unaware of their privileges. They've lived with certain advantages for so long that they've become numb or are oblivious to the fact that others don't have them. This can lead to unconscious narratives that are hard to break. For example, this problem doesn't affect me. There's nothing I can do about it. It's not my job to fix it. It's probably not as bad as everyone says it is. This is just the way it's always been. So if you recognise your deepest thoughts in these statements, this fireside is for you, to gain insight to see how you can make a change. The only way to end bias is to teach everyone to unlearn it. Speak out whenever you see injustice and be an unwavering ally. We, as a movement, as those who lead us, have an important responsibility to speak up on behalf of positive societal change and to back their diverse colleagues and fellow employees and members with support. The burden should not be on those who face discrimination, but on those who don't. Those who have the privilege of being heard, taken seriously without prejudice. So as credit unionists, be we volunteers, employees or leaders, we should consider, how do I get someone who isn't a minority to care about others who are? As Dr. Seuss said, sometimes the questions are complicated and the answers are simple. So tonight's virtual engagement, diversity, equality, inclusion, over to our host and moderator, Alison Carr, Chief Strategy Officer for your credit union partner. Alison, over to you.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for welcoming all of us to this panel session today. Before we get started, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Robert Kelly, President and CEO of the Association of British Credit Unions. So, Robert, if you could please share some words with us before we get into our discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, everyone today for attending, whether it's good morning, good afternoon or good evening all over the world. It's a great privilege for me as the ABCUL CEO, not only to look forward to jointly hosting and helping WOCCU host the conference next year in Glasgow, my home city if the accent doesn't give it away, and for the second time in 11 years that the conference will be in Glasgow, and I think we're all set for a wonderful time. The video doesn't do our wonderful city justice, so please, everyone, wherever you can, come and join us to celebrate the opportunity to be together as credit union activists next summer in Glasgow. Just wanted to thank Alan.hignett and Ian.brewer from the Yorkshire North East Forum within the ABCUL family for their vision of these fireside chats, for being willing and able to innovate, to push forward the agenda, to have the ideas and the inspiration to do these sessions, and to all our speakers from across the globe, credit union family in so many respects. And it's wonderful to have so many people here that are going to engage in this session today. Why is this session important? Why is this topic important? Well, we have taken, in Great Britain, we have taken, and within ABCUL, we have taken great inspiration from the difference and the change in attitudes across the US And we recognise that that came in great adversity, and the death of George Floyd and other incidents that galvanised people to put these topics front and centre. And so I don't speak for 1 minute on anyone's behalf of trying to understand the challenges around inequality and the challenges around lack of inclusion and the challenges around lack of diversity that we've all perhaps suffered throughout our careers, throughout our lives. That comes in many shapes and forms. It comes in different ways. Sometimes it comes silently, sometimes it comes much more overtly. But I think we will all have experiences of that. So, you know, this is not a competitive environment. This is about credit union activists and collaborators and cooperators learning from each other. And I think we heard the video earlier on talk about inclusion starts with I. For me, the last 12, 18 months, whether that's within the pandemic, where we've had to pivot to different ways of working, different collaborative styles, but also in the face of horrendous adversity for different communities across the US, across North America, and across the world. And we recognise that the problem's much bigger than just one country. But it's given us inspiration to try and challenge the misconceptions, as Alan mentioned, the unconscious or conscious bias that exists. And I think as credit union people, as credit union activists, we have a great opportunity to collaborate, to cooperate, to inspire, to empower communities, and to make sure that what we are as the epicenters of social justice and social equality, providing financial resilience, good products and services, and the ability for communities to empower each other and work together. That is the very reason why we get out of bed in the morning. Certainly it is for me. It's the very reason why we love this sector so much. It's the very reason why it can be challenging at times, because we don't do enough and we always want to strive to do more. So on behalf of the Association of British Credit Unions as ABCUL, on behalf of our forum areas across the country, on behalf of our board, thank you to Alan, to Ian, to Alison for all your help in terms of moderating, to all our speakers for the inspiration that you've provided, and to ensuring that this is credit unions at their best, being innovative, being inspiring, being collective, being collaborative, creating learning opportunities, and also creating an environment where people feel empowered and people feel safe to talk about the right things and to do the right things. There'll be many inspiring stories and conversations throughout the course of the next couple of hours. For me, again, a huge honour to represent and run this organisation. I couldn't do that without the rest of the staff team and our board and your collective membership in striving for better for our members across Great Britain and across the world. Glasgow is the credit union city, or the credit union epicentre of Great Britain. Over 25% of the population are engaged as credit union members. So we're delighted, me personally, on behalf of my hometown, to welcome everyone next year, but also to get the conversation flowing for the rest of the time between now and then, whereby we can hear from such illustrious speakers and to learn from each other. So keep doing what you're doing, keep fighting the battles every day, and keep making sure that the credit union system is the place that drives social justice and drives equality for all. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Robert. And I understand we're having some technical difficulties. We are working to resolve that. We are recording, so we will have this available. So we hope that everyone will be able to get the full program, even if we're delayed a little bit this morning. Now we have a special guest message this evening, and if we could, Jackie, tee that up to hear from Elyssa McCarter LaBorde, who is the new president and CEO of the World Council of Credit Unions, to welcome and start us off. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Alison Carr, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Your Credit Union Partner. And this is the second in a series of 4 webinars called We Are Community, the Road to Glasgow World Council of Credit Union Conferences 2022. And I have the honor to be here to facilitate our discussion today. We have an amazing group of experienced DEI practitioners, and I'm excited to hear from each of them. And today we're really only going to be scratching the surface on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and discussing at a high level, what is DEI? Why is it important? What are the barriers and obstacles for us as individuals, personally and professionally, and for our credit unions? And how do we move the conversation forward from just discussing and talking about it into action? Now, this is meant to be a conversation, not just amongst our panelists, but between all of us, among all of us. So we encourage you to please put your questions into the chat. We will do our best to incorporate those into our discussion. And for any that we are not able to get to, we will be sure to compile these and share out to attendees. As we get started, I encourage everyone to be thinking about, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you? And if you're comfortable, please take a moment and share that in the chat so we can hear from you. And please also engage in the chat and comment about what we're talking about and things that resonate with you. A few thoughts before we get started. DEI is a journey. Our experiences and our perspectives are constantly evolving. There are no cheat sheets to this work. It's an ongoing process. And today, this is a safe space. So there are things that may be shared that are uncomfortable to hear, but today is about growth, learning, and change. So with that, I would like to introduce our first group of panelists. We have Renee Sadie-White, who is the president and CEO of the African American Credit Union Coalition, referred to as AACUC here in the States. And she's responsible for the execution and strategic vision of the organization. She has over 30 years of experience in the world of finance, starting as a teller. I think many of us started as a teller in the credit union movement, and has worked with credit unions for over 25 years. She's a former instructor at Spelman College Continuing Education Department and a facilitator for the United Way of Greater Atlanta's VIP Board Development Program. She is a certified diversity professional, a credit union development educator, motivational speaker, and I could go on and on talking about Renee. She is a friend and a mentor, and we are so thrilled to have her with us today. So welcome, Renee. Also on our first panel, we have Chad Helmanak, who is the Director of Programs and Impact for the National Credit Union Foundation. And in his role, he leads the Credit Union Development Educator Program and resources to support the cooperative business model, which encourages sustainable development and inspires organizations to build a purpose-driven culture. A facilitator and creative consultant with over 15 years of experience in the credit union movement. Prior to joining the foundation, Chad has worked for CUNA Mutual Group, Heritage Credit Union, Feline Research Institute, and the Wisconsin Credit Union League. Welcome, Chad. And last but not least, we have the lovely Roxana Kauser, who is the Member Service Advisor at Calderdale Credit Union in the UK. She has been working in the credit union movement for over 6 years and has been a participant in the Credit Union Futures Program and represents the Young Professionals Network as an ambassador to the Credit Union Foundation Board in the UK. And Roxana, share in your story in that when you started looking for a job, you found a job in a credit union. You didn't know what it was or what it was about, but once you found out, it's home and you're here to stay. So welcome, Roxana. It is a pleasure to have the three of you with us. And so our topic today is really about why diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a big ask. But I want to start with you, Renee, in why now? Why is DEI a topic of conversation?
Well, as Mr. Kelly talked about, and thank you for allowing me to be here. And on behalf of the Worldwide Council of Credit Unions, I'm going to say thank you, thank you, thank you. We can't wait to get to Glasgow in 2022. I'm a proud board member of the foundation. So again, thank you for having us here. And Alison, you do a wonderful job. And my panelists, co-panelists is great. I can't wait. I can't wait. DEI, I think now the world had a visceral reaction to what we saw that happened to Mr. Floyd. And from that, it is no longer, racism is no longer just happening in one place. The spotlight has been shined in a way that can't take back. It's kind of like you let the horse out of the barn and it's running for its life. And so DEI can be looked upon as that. We have got to catch this running horse if we're going to change how we live, how we all interact with one another. And I think that is why the horrificness of what we saw globally has united people and wanting people to want to do better, want to know more about how they can do, what can they change, how can they make this work. And so I think that the graphicness of what we saw is the impetus of why we're seeing the results that we're seeing with people coming together. I think you can't ignore it anymore.
You know, you are so true. Between the pandemic, between worldwide events, I mean, what's happened here in the States, we can't ignore it. I think many of us in a privileged place where we didn't have to, but now it is the future of our world, of our organizations, to be able to openly discuss this and help to ensure that moving forward, our organizations, our employees are supported, and that we really have that perspective and that lens. So a follow-up question, you know, in the credit union space specifically, you know, what are you seeing and what are you hearing in terms of how organizations are starting their DEI journey, or those that had been on the path for DEI? How have they, you know, elevated their work? How are they standing up?
I think the first thing is that the CUDE collective, the fact that we have a group of practitioners whose main focus is to make sure that we spread the word throughout the credit union movement, that we make sure that best practices are being acknowledged and are looked upon. I'm seeing credit unions who really want to make a difference. ACC's membership has gone through the roof. Prior to the pandemic and the social unrest, we had 8 corporate partners. We now have 36 corporate partners. And so just in that short of time, we've tripled the involvement. So what I see from credit unions is a real earnest attempt at making sure that there is equity, that there is understanding. People, and I feel for some people who feel like, oh my God, we've been talking about this for 20 months already. Can we talk about something else? Well, no, we can't. It's kind of like, it's here, it's not going anywhere. So let's deal with it. That's been the problem. We've swept it underneath the rug for so long. We've turned a blind eye, and I think we can't any longer.
No, very true. And I love how you used a phrase on another discussion we were on about you represent the possibility of people helping people passionately. And I think that is you, and that is who we are as credit unions. And that applies across the board. So thank you, Renee, for sharing that. Now, Chad, kind of building off of what Renee shared, you know, people are like, okay, why are we still talking about this? You know, we've done X, Y, and Z. Can we move on to something else? And the answer is no, we can't. And I like something that you said. It's like, you know, well, I'm not really good at this DEI stuff. You know, I'm not good at empathy. And you're like, well, it's time to get good at it because, you know, we don't have a choice. So what does this mean for us as professionals, as credit unions, in terms of the need for empathy and really building meaningful relationships and moving discussion forward around DEI?
Thanks, Alison, and it's good to be on a panel with Renee and Roxana, so I'm grateful to be here. It comes down to purpose and empathy, and purpose is directly tied to our goals around diversity, equity, inclusion, our purpose in credit unions. The first credit unions were created in Europe to help people overcome food insecurity and poverty. And over the years, credit unions and the cooperative model in financial services has been applied to help people overcome barriers to access, whether it's African Americans in the South, here in the US, in the States, making sure that they had access to credit to afford farm equipment, whether it was Japanese families after they were placed in World War II internment camps here in the States, credit unions being a model for them after that experience to help them rebuild wealth, and women and Hispanic populations, and all over the world, really. I'm speaking to US examples, but we don't talk enough about how diversity, equity, inclusion is directly within our DNA as credit unions. So it's not something new that we're doing. It's not something that we look at and say, well, we got to, you know, there's certainly an expertise and a chops you need, but it's what we were built to do. And right now, what we're hearing, and to your comment about, well, you know, empathy I'm not really good at, we're seeing empathy as foundational to practicing inclusivity. And this idea of empathy in credit unions has been thought of as a member service tool, a way to help us build those trusted relationships with members. But it's really something like diversity, equity, inclusion that has to live within our organizations from the top down, this ability to practice empathy, not just with members, but those we work with and our and people in our communities as well that aren't yet our members. So there's a lot to say about empathy and putting it into practice, but at the core of empathy is this ability to listen and learn through listening. And when we do that, we open ourselves up to building healthy relationships, avoiding assumptions. I've heard that assumptions are the termites of healthy relationships. And so when we start passing judgments, when we allow our brains to get into this mode where we're thinking fast, acting fast, and making these assumptions, we lose the ability to connect and learn from people. So empathy, thankfully, as I talked about diversity, equity, inclusion, the credit union business model, going hand in hand over time, empathy also with the ability to learn what the needs of our members are and how to serve them. Has been since day one part of who we are. So all that said, this idea of purpose and empathy coming together, rooted in our institutions, but now more important than ever to practice, because there's this element of burnout we can talk about more, this element of stress and people just feeling the general weight of the pandemic. To remember our purpose and to practice empathy is more important than ever now.
No, you raise a good point, Chad, about burnout. And Renee, you kind of alluded to this, that we are juggling so much right now. We have the pandemic, you know, lack of social interactions that we are used to, many of us working in our basements, and really losing part of our identity as a result of this. And that bubbles over into so many aspects of our lives, personally and professionally. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion and we look at burnout and the need to be more empathetic, Chad, what would you, when you're working with credit unions and when you're doing training around this, how would you address that? How would you help raise that dialogue?
Beyond education around what empathy is and how to put it into practice as an individual, it's also as an organization, how can we incorporate empathy into our business model? How do we let it live within our own walls? And so it's rather simple, but we always don't do it. Time and space, the ability to practice empathy and make mistakes, to have tough maybe conversations, to ask thoughtful questions. So there's a conscious effort to do that. And so we've seen credit unions do this in town hall meetings and small team meetings and have, especially this conversation around racism and what can we do as credit unions to be more inclusive. Those conversations, having time and space to do that, are important. The other important element of this is action, in listening and not just taking those thoughts in, but seriously committing ourselves to action as well. So the idea that time and space can be created to have these conversations. And another tangible example is Sometimes we look at branch transactions or call center, how many do we do in an hour or something like that. Speed and efficiency is important, but how do you balance that out with the ability to ask a member, how are you doing today? No, really, how are you doing today? Why is this loan payment late? Could you just help me understand this? And not from a point of judgment, but from a point of learning and understanding. So how do we create time and space as leaders in credit unions to allow our people to do that?
Fantastic. That reminds me of a quote. I am a huge fan of Simon Sinek. I'm just going to divulge that. If anyone follows me on social, I post his thoughts for the day. And he had a quote recently that talked, we are not accountable to the numbers, we are accountable to the people. And I think that, that is the foundation of credit unions, is the people in the community, not just our members, but our employees and our volunteers, is, being accountable, checking in, being present, and creating that safe space and that relationship, that place of relationship to have honest conversations. Thank you, Chad. Roxana, now Chad and Renee directly and indirectly brought up, the issue of our identities and how that plays into, our professional lives. And, you are a young mom, you're a working mom, a Muslim woman. There's a lot of different hats and identities that you represent. So I'd like to hear from you and your perspective as a young professional. What are some of the challenges that you faced, and maybe the opportunities that you see from your experience, and how, as credit union leaders, as organizations, we can show up for our employees?
Well, I want to just say, Chad, you brought up a question of just asking people, how are you doing? Right? Just actually, please ask me. I say to everyone, please ask me how I'm doing. Because being a young mom, working, it's really difficult. I only work part-time. I work 25 hours a week, but then I try and do as much as I can outside of my work hours with volunteering. But then my children do, like you saw them earlier, they were running around. I can hear them shouting at each other downstairs while I'm talking. But that's part of the challenge, and I feel like for so long, I've been working at my credit union for quite a few years now, and I have to say for the first 3 years, I was always really worried about bringing up the children and saying, I have a responsibility outside of work, and I need you to understand that. But then it was also trying to say, well, there's certain reasons why I can't do certain things that you're asking me to do, or if there's an event on, etc. And it's always a challenge. But being a young mom, or being young, is hard in itself. We have to prove ourselves to management, to people that have been within the organisation a lot longer than we have. But then being a mom, being Muslim, and being of a South Asian background adds to its challenges, and I don't think we talk about it enough. I've been to a few events. At the ABCUL AGM, for example, I'll walk into the room, in the conference room, and I'm the only visible Muslim person there, and I think, oh wow, it's a little bit difficult, or it was at first, but now I'm me and I can represent young Muslim mums around the globe, I think. But it's trying to put out what I see as a challenge, because it's not a barrier. My religion is not a barrier for me, because I say yes to everything that I'm given an opportunity for. But it has its ups and downs. Like, I can't travel, I can't be somewhere away for the night. Please bear that into account. When opportunities come available, just ask, is there anything extra that we can do that might help? I've never been limited, but I've not been able to stay away for certain things. But yeah, just ask. If there's any questions, just ask. ask me because I'm visible, I'm here, I make an effort. But yeah, just be for management or for people on the board, be understanding that young mums do want to be board of directors. We want to be on the board for organisations. We want to have management roles. But we have young families and we will prioritise them as well, just as much as we will for our professional life.
No, that's beautiful. I cued into something you said. It's about representation, and I think that's a big part of why we're here today, is not making assumptions about people's lives and what they're interested in, about looking around us and seeing where the opportunity is and asking people what they want. It's a simple thing, right, to engage in discussion. But if there is a fear of what do I say, how do I act, I don't want to offend, I know that can create challenges. Now, you are very involved in the YP network. You know, we talk about representation. Bringing in the next generation of leadership is not just a need, it's an imperative to the future of the credit union movement. So can you share a little bit about the work that you've been engaged with on the YP network and bringing greater awareness to young professionals in the UK?
Yeah, so the ABCUL Young Professionals Network was set up a few years ago by some amazing people, and I just jumped on board because I wanted to be involved. I had the fear of missing out. I think that's what it was. I was like, there's something going on. I need to be involved. I need to say yes. And I think I've forced my way, but I am quite professional, so you know, that speaks for itself. But the Young Professionals Network has opened doors for myself and other people within the ABCUL YPN network. We offer different opportunities. We will try and make sure that there's scholarships or even just funding for people that might not be able to do certain things. I've come on leaps and bounds since being on the YP network. I'm vice chair now on the steering committee, which I'm really proud of. But last year, just before COVID hit London and everything was shut down, we were part of the Global Youth Summit. And again, it was for young professionals. It was for young people to put their hand up and say, yeah, we want to be part of the bigger picture. Don't leave us out. And the YP network is a great way of having young people be engaged and have somebody or a group of people that they can reach out to if they're not sure about anything. So yeah, if you're on the call and you've not joined the YP network, can you please do so? We're all right.
Oh, fantastic. And I know we're going to hear from Paul Norgrove and Bobby Gould a little bit later about some of the initiatives within ABCUL. So a little teaser from Roxana. We're coming to the close of this session. I don't want it to end, but I could just keep talking forever. So for each of you, and I'll start with Renee and then to Chad and Roxana, what is your word of advice, word of wisdom for individuals that are looking to get more involved or have a voice on the topic of diversity and inclusion?
Alison, you did say I'm the possibility of people serving other people passionately. I'll say that again. I'm the possibility of people serving other people passionately. And that's why I get up in the morning. That's why I continue to do what I do here in the States. I would say that to be gentle with yourself. We didn't get to this place overnight. There's no pill you can take to instantly not have any biases. There's no pill you can take that you're not looking at somebody with a third eye. There's no pill you can take. Be gentle with yourself. Assume that people want the best and not the worst. So that's my advice, is to assume that people want the best and not the worst, and that always remember that we all bleed red, not green like Mr. Spock. So at the end of it, at the end of everything, we're still human beings having a human experience here. And so the best thing that we can do is be intentional and be kind.
Thank you. Yes, assume good intentions. Chad.
What Renee just said complements, I think, what I was going to say is this idea of compassion, but also self-compassion. This idea of burnout and the science behind it, it's a little like depression or anxiety where you don't know you're always in it. And so this idea of exploring ourselves as well as helping other people to have the space and grace to do it, the self-exploration, I think we can't afford to burn out now, none of us, for any reason. And to be in this evolution of our work, it's so meaningful. So all that said, it's this idea of taking a deep breath and practicing this element to just take care of ourselves so we can stay in this fight. Yeah, and so all that said, self-compassion starts with us.
Thank you. Breathe, I like that, and breathe. Roxana.
For me, I think having this conversation around DEI, it's really important for me to say, ask questions. I've been on the end where people wouldn't say certain things. They wouldn't swear. They wouldn't use foul language in front of me. And it was like, well, you know, I know everything. I can swear as well. And they just wouldn't do it because of what because of my headscarf. They were like, oh, but you're Muslim. I was like, yeah, Muslims swear. I hate to break it to you, but we do. And I would say just ask questions if you're not sure. I know we've touched on the Black Lives Matter movement, and I am not educated at all. Even before the George Floyd incident had happened, my eyes were open. So my takeaway would be just to advise everyone, just ask questions in a compassionate way. Don't, be rude, be compassionate, but ask, because I'll happily answer any questions. Or give you links, or just say, have a look at this website. But yeah, ask.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that is a very good note to end on. It's just ask. We are all on a journey of growth and learning and exploration based on our personal and lived experiences. And there's so much that we can learn from each other. Just ask. Well, thank you three very much, Renee, Miss Renee, Chad, Roxana. I appreciate you being here with us today. And now we will pivot on to our next panel. So Jackie, if you can cue us up for that, that would be fantastic. So panel number 2 is about myth busting, addressing the stereotypes and stigmas around DEI. When we were having our planning calls, we had such rich dialogue around how we approach the conversation of DEI, and it really drilled down to, telling our stories and how do we just overcome people's perceptions, misperceptions about who we are, what we do, how we live. So I'm really thrilled to have with us Sarah Hope Marshall, not just a colleague, but a friend hailing from the Midwest. She is an accomplished speaker, an experienced community development consultant, has a vast diversity and social impact experience in her consulting work, spending 2 decades in various forms of community development. She has an MBA from North Park University, having achieved that in 2010. And we have worked with her, myself and Scott Butterfield have worked with her when she was CEO of Northside Community Credit Union in Chicago, Illinois, who was also a CDFI, where community development was very rooted in their mission and their purpose and their advocacy. As a result of Sarah's time in the industry, she's experienced data conversions, mergers, technology upgrades, etc. The list goes on, and has used these experiences to help her on the subjects of leadership and management, really giving her practical experience on teaching others on navigating transition. So welcome, Sarah. And we also have with us Shona McGlashan, who is Vice President of Governance and Corporate Secretary at Van City Credit Union and leads Van City's mental health strategy. Shona is also a fellow of the Chartered Governance Institute and has held senior governance and policy roles on both sides of the Atlantic, including the UK's House of Commons and Mountain Equipment Co-op, MEC. So for any friends that may be also joining us from the States, that's the equivalent of REI here for us. Over the course of her career, she's led governance, public affairs, diversity, inclusion, and privacy functions. Shona also sits on the board of BARD, on the boards of BARD on the Beach and Van City Community Foundation. So welcome, Shona. And Shona joins us from Vancouver, British Columbia. And we also have joining with us Elaine Bowes from Pentecostal Credit Union. Elaine is the Marketing Communications Director with the credit union, and she is also a strategically focused specialist in the area of equality, diversity, and inclusion, bringing strong analytical, business, and leadership skills. She has worked largely in the public sector, but has a range of experience that she brings to her work with the credit union. She has a strong track record of delivering change initiatives resulting in measurable improvements with respect to organizational performance around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we just learned that through her work, she has an article recently published. So we will make sure to drop that in the chat so everyone can take advantage of that. And before we move into our conversation, I also want to share with our audience, as we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, please share with us your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. What does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you? And want to be, we are all coming from different places, so it's really important that we share that and we know where each other is coming from in this conversation. All right, are we ready to get started? So we know that there's many layers to diversity. There's visible and invisible. There's a graphic that, the classic iceberg graphic where there's the tip of the iceberg and that's what we see, but there's so much more below the surface. And it's part of our uniqueness in what we bring to our organizations and into our relationships. So Sarah, I want to start with you. The topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion is a personal one for you as well. You have lived a life with an invisible rare disease, and I know it's impacted your perspective around diversity, equity, and inclusion as a credit union leader. So how have stigmas or stereotypes impacted you in your professional life?
Thanks, Alison, and I'm really excited to be here. Chad said it really well in the last session when he talked about assumptions. The assumption that I've always had to wrestle with was that I was well and healthy and not excluded, which just was not true for me. So as Alison mentioned, I was born with a rare genetic disorder. My body's unable to metabolize protein. I have a condition called PKU, and the treatment throughout my life was an extremely restrictive medical diet. I couldn't eat protein in any form. So any social situation and any meal was a barrier for me. And so I lived a life struggling with access to a very basic thing that everybody needs from day to day just to survive. But because I looked normal and I looked healthy, I would go into many social situations and people just expected that I didn't need anything, that I didn't really deal with any challenges. And so I had to learn to navigate life, continuing to wrestle with this condition. And I think what has really informed my perspective most is understanding of systems. I'm in my 40s, which I don't always share, but it's important to know in this context because when I was born, treatment was still very, very new, and doctors did not know or have as much options available as I have now. And so throughout my life, what happens with this condition, if it's not very well managed, is that it causes severe neurocognitive disorder. So if I had not been treated at birth, I would be severely autistic today. And I tell people that's the difference that access can make for people, whether it's to financial products or to whatever level of access that they need, it can make a tremendous difference in outcomes. But as treatments have improved for me throughout my life, my own outcomes improved. To the point that a few years ago in the US, there was a treatment developed that eliminated my need for medical diet. And for the first time, I was able to live daily life without barriers. And the difference is outstanding. And I won't go on and on, but what that really highlighted for me as a leader in the community development space was that people do wrestle with individual things, but changing systems is critical to diversity, equity, and inclusion in order for people to actually have what they need and to be included and have access to the things that will make a tangible difference in their day-to-day lives.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for sharing your story. It is so important, the role that systems play for good or for not good, and how we can address those and help advocate for change. And I know a lot of your work is also advocating in the mental, or not in the mental health, but in the health field around PKU, and how to move forward with that. So thank you. And now, Shona, I did a little research and I found, 1 in 5 people have a mental health issue, and that there's over 450 million people worldwide struggling with mental health issues. So for you, from the topic of stigmas and stereotypes, how has this impacted your life, and how has it informed your work that you do?
Thanks very much, Alison. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm having this discussion with you all here today from Vancouver, BC, which is the traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I'm really grateful to be here on this land. That's a great question. And sort of going back to where we started from, for me, the point of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives is to make sure that everybody can be their true, authentic self. Wherever they are in the world, right? Which means that people do not have to hide aspects of themselves. They do not have to code switch in order to fit in. And one of the things we've been talking about, and the iceberg metaphor that you refer to, is that there's so many different aspects of diversity, visible and invisible. So, for example, it's quite obvious from anybody who meets me that I am a white woman. And like many women, and I would probably say all women, I've had my Me Too moments. Most, if not all, women have been subject to stereotypes, stigma, harassment, microaggressions, assaults, and so on, by the very virtue of the fact that they're women. And that battle is not over. But we also know that white women have been the greatest beneficiaries so far of diversity initiatives. So it's time to it's past time to widen the conversation and talk about the intersectionality of all the other different diversities that people bring. And for me personally, the invisible diversity that I bring is that for the last 15 years, I've been living with a mental health disorder. So I have major depressive disorder, which, you meet me, you can tell that I'm a white woman. You meet me, you cannot tell that I have a mental health disorder. I'm a really good actor and I'm very good at hiding it, even in my very darkest moments. The first time I told anybody in the work, in the work arena that I had a mental health disorder, I thought I was going to throw up, because I was so anxious about how people were going to treat me, how people would look at me, whether I would still get projects, whether I would still be seen as a fellow professional, whether it would impact my, my work relationships. And I only actually had that conversation quite a long time into my mental health journey, when I was really very well recovered, even though I feel like it's a lifelong journey for many of us, and probably for me too, because it took some time to kind of accrue the power and influence and stability to feel like it was okay for me to speak up about this. And even after I had those conversations with close colleagues in HR, it then took another long time before I was able to be really open about it in the workspace and step into the place I am now, where I'm an advocate for mental health issues. What I'd like to do in my work is completely normalize discussion of mental health illness, mental health disorders, and mental health, because, whether you have a disorder or not, we all have to take care of our mental health just in the same way that we take care of our physical health. I'd love us to work in a world where it's just as easy for somebody to say that they're going to see their psychiatrist as it is for them to say they're going to see their dentist. And you had a quote from Simon Sinek. One of my favorite quotes is from a writer called Seth Godin, and he said, If you're not drowning, you're a lifeguard. And for me, like, I'm no longer drowning, and I feel like I have a big responsibility in the workplace to be a lifeguard for other people who are struggling with things that I have struggled with, because life is much easier when you are able to talk about and be honest about what's going on with you. That's kind of a roundabout way of answering the question, I guess.
No, that's beautiful. I'm just writing that quote down. I like that. If you're not drowning, you're a lifeguard. And
you're a lifeguard. Everybody who's not drowning needs to be a lifeguard.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the topic of intersectionality. And Chad touched on this when, you know, he talked about the need for empathy and compassion and issues around burnout that have stemmed from the pandemic. And we know as a result of the pandemic, mental health issues have become also much more open in how we talk about what we're feeling and what we're going through. I mean, EAP in the States, Employee Assistance Program, is a program that many employers offer for their employees to have access to talk about issues that they're facing. And you know, covering and code switching and not being able to bring your whole self to work. I mean, that's another level of another weight that you carry with you that impacts your ability to do your job and be present. I'm trying to figure out where I was going that. I had a really good question that was coming out of that. So I guess then how can we create a more inclusive place of belonging? You know, we have policy, and policy is great, but outside of policy, from a culture perspective, how do we overcome that chasm of going from talking about it to action, where we're really really demonstrating to our workforce and to our communities that we are here for them?
Can I jump in on this one? So I think there are two really important streams, and as I lead the mental health strategy at Vancity, which is Canada's largest credit union, they're both really important. And one of them is that you talk about it's the framework of, do you have employee assistance? Do you have money available for people to see therapists? You know, do you have training for your managers? So we're training all of our managers in how to support mental health, mental wellness at work, and various things like that. But there's also from the culture piece. There's leadership vulnerability and leadership authenticity. When you have leaders in your organization who are able to talk about their mental health, it makes a massive cultural difference. So for us, you know, fortunately for me, I'm now in a space where I can say, you know, I'm living with mental health disorder. And that makes life, it feels self-aggrandizing really, but it's not. To have a leader in the organization say that makes life easier for other people in the organization who are experiencing something similar. And for other leaders who may or may not have disorders, to talk about their mental health goes a really long way. So our CEO recently shared in one of her announcements to the organization that she was feeling kind of anxious about back to school and her kids going back to school and what's going on with COVID and how she's going to get back into her routine. And, you know, we heard back from so many of the people in our organization that knowing that the CEO is kind of feeling antsy about this really helped them feel like it was okay to share those things as well, to say, you know, like today I'm not feeling good because, you know, this is the first day that my kid's gone back to school full time since March 2020, and I just don't know how I feel about it. So leadership, vulnerability, and authenticity is something that everybody can do. Talk about what's working for you in terms of your mental wellness, your physical wellness. You know, talk about how you're feeling and make it okay. You know, you know, ask people, how are you doing? And be prepared to share how you're doing too.
Yeah, that's true. Going back to what Roxana said, just ask how somebody's doing. How are they feeling? Sincerely and authentically, not just in passing for conversation. Thank you. Sarah, same question to you. I know your credit union that you, Northside, was very unique. And your lived experience informed how you approached leadership with the credit union, how you worked with your team, how you worked with your members. Can you share a little bit your perspective on, you know, how can we move from policy to creating that culture of inclusivity?
Yeah, that's also a great question, and I'll actually start with differentiating between situational exclusion and systemic exclusion. I think it's a really critical point to make a difference, because on an individual level, when an organization begins to engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, they're beginning to address situational exclusion. So they're beginning to address exclusion that happens within the context of that workplace. But if an employee is included in the workplace, but when goes out into broader society and is still dealing with barriers, then they're systematically excluded. And in order to address situational exclusion, you have to understand the larger systematic barriers that are happening that are causing exclusion on a broader level. That's a really critical point because it goes back to understanding and empathy and really understanding what problem you're trying to solve. So it's important to differentiate what you're doing. And when a collective of organizations, such as all those on this call, come into agreement and begin to make external policy changes and begin to advocate for higher level change, that begins to change the course of the systematic exclusion. No one organization on its own can change a system. They can change the situation, and hopefully a number of these collective situations that are changing will make a difference on a governmental level or policy level. That's really the first thing that I think is really important to say. And then the second thing is something that Shona, I think, expressed really well, is that if you want to address situational exclusion, you can't tolerate it in the culture. So situational exclusion can show up in many different ways, from bullying to gaslighting to stonewalling. And so if you want to have an inclusive environment, you can't tolerate behaviors that are exclusive, that are shutting people out, that are creating barriers to access for people, because anybody can experience situational exclusion. Not everybody experiences systematic exclusion. So that's a critical difference. But if you want your workplace to be inclusive, you can't allow for things where people are excluded situationally, because they don't have the psychological safety to think about the bigger issues and making sure that people who are systematically excluded are then included in that situation. So I would highlight some of those differences and making sure that as you begin to think about diversity, that you're kind of taking all these different situations into account.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. And I think that's a great segue to hear from Elaine. Elaine, you're with Pentecostal Credit Union. The credit union itself has been a strong advocate against discrimination within the United Kingdom, within the credit union movement. I mean, just given the history of who you serve, I mean, you came into the existence, the credit union, as a result of discrimination and exclusion. And one of the oldest credit unions in the country, and really focused on financial empowerment and wealth creation for their members. So from your perspective, how do we help to address these systemic issues and overcome these stereotypes and stigmas in meeting the whole person needs? And specifically, I know you have a unique story with Pentecostal. So what does that mean to you in terms of cross-cultural communication and addressing those systemic issues?
Right. So can you hear me?
There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. So I was saying that was a lot actually to do all in one. But what I think I'll do first of all is talk about the credit union's experience, because I think how we came about and why we came about, and then really address the other issues around bigger organisational things and as you say, the cross-cultural communication and what people need to do. So first of all, yes, we've been in existence since 1980. We're 41 years old. But actually the inspiration for the credit union came from our founder, who came here in the UK, that is, to London from Jamaica, from the Caribbean in 1955. And I'll tell you his story because that's really, really important to us being here today, just very quickly. We're a faith-based credit union, and faith is extremely important in our communities, actually. And when our founder came here, he was a boy of 17, and he was an Anglican, and he went to an Anglican church soon after he arrived, a local Anglican church, just up the road to where he lived. And he attended the service, and at the end of the service, actually it was the third time he'd been there. The first time he went, no one said anything to him. The second time he went, nobody said anything to him. The third time he went, the vicar at the end of the service came up to him and thanked him for coming, but asked him not to return. And that actually experience was not uncommon. There were many people who came, Windrush, as we call them, the Windrush generation, who experienced that. But as a result of that, actually, he didn't return. But he went and he told some friends about it. And his friends said to him, "Don't worry about them. Come and join us. We're going to a church group that meets in people's houses, Pentecostal church group that meets in people's houses." And his experience in his career grew in the Pentecostal church community, which was largely Black Caribbean and latterly became Black African movement. And 25 years later, in 1980, after he'd spent those years in the Pentecostal church, and we'd experienced discrimination and exclusion, financial exclusion for our communities. Many people who went to the banks to get loans were turned down because of their race, and lots of other forms of exclusion and discrimination around finance. And for him, the big issue was actually what was going on with our churches, because our churches also weren't being able to get the money to buy churches because they were Black churches. And that was the reason why he formed the Pentecostal Credit Union. And currently, 99% of our members are Black African and Black Caribbean. And we know and we are in business to support our members through this form of discrimination that we know they experience, which is the reason why financial empowerment and other forms of empowerment through our member development programs are really important to us. Financial exclusion is the place where we don't want to find our members, and we support them. We support their efforts to own businesses, to run businesses, and to own their homes, because empowerment is really important to us. And one of the myths, I think, around us as a business, because we experience discrimination as a Black business, as well as our members do, but we do also as a business. And one of the myths around what happens with us is that actually, because, you know, Black communities, we come in this country, we appear very high on all the indices of deprivation: poor housing, unemployment, low income, all of those indices of deprivation. You will see, you know, Black communities at the top of those indices. And there's an assumption because of that, that's what's going on in our credit union, and that's what's going on in our business, and we can't run our business properly. We don't understand about money, we don't understand about finance. There are all of these myths and stereotypes around us, but actually that is not the case. The levels of entrepreneurship in our community, as they are in the churches, are extremely high. The entrepreneurial spirit is very high, and you know, when we talk about business development programs, that's what our members want. The average shareholding in our credit union is £5,000. I don't know what that translates to in dollars, but I know it's higher than many other credit unions. So these are myths, actually, and stereotypes and things that we experience all the time, that we actually, to be honest with you, we ignore them. If I'm going to be honest with you, we ignore it. We've got somewhere to go. As far as we're concerned, we've got no time for it. We understand about systemic discrimination. We understand about systemic racism. We see it all the time. We have somewhere to go as a business, with our communities, with our people, and that's where we're going. So we see it, we deal with it, but we're on a journey, and that's where we're going. So the other question, I think, was about what can we do in relation to dismantle or address issues of discrimination and exclusion. And I'll say something very, very quickly. You know, people have been talking about empathy. Chad talked about it very importantly, and so did everybody. And it is actually critical. But actually, so empathy in relation to individuals and how we treat each other is critical. But organisations need empathy, and organisations need to build empathy into the way they do things systemically. Look, institutional discrimination is systemic. It's set into the way it's all around us. And I actually agree very much with Sarah when she says, if an organisation that's attempting to dismantle exclusion in their organisation does not recognise and doesn't recognise the fact that they're living in a system, a whole environment, a whole community that does it, then, you know, they're on a hiding to nothing, to be quite honest with you. But but we do have a tool, actually, that can help us to dismantle it, systemically. And in this country, we call it the impact assessment. It is a form of organisational empathy. It makes an organisation stop and think about what they are doing every step of the way. Empathy is, how would I like it? If you did that to me, how would I feel about that? How would that impact me? And the process, when built into what organisations do, actually does that, you know, and it does it systemically. It's all we've got, you know, because you know, institutional racism, institutional discrimination is insidious. You can't often put your hand on it. It's not about the obvious things that people do. It can happen all the time. You don't even know that it's happening. The amount of times things would have happened to me and I wouldn't even know that that's what was really going on. Sometimes I know, sometimes I feel it, but more times than not, I don't. But that's how the systems are built. So we have to take approaches to do it. And the other thing that Sarah said that's really important is, do you know, if you say you're going to deal with this thing, but you're going to put up with bad behaviour, offensive behaviour, bullying in your organisation, and you don't do anything about it, bullying on the basis of race, gender, or any kind of bullying, you're never going to get there. An organisation has to state it unequivocally. This is how you will behave in this place. Actually, I actually do believe that being really, you know, really clear about what you do, what your values are. You have your values, you live your values, you expect people to behave in a certain way, is really the way to do it. You know, it's one of the things you do. You make sure that everybody knows this is the kind of behaviour we expect around here. Everybody understands it. You know, there is training, there is development, there's whatever you need so that everybody knows what bad behaviour looks like and what good behaviour looks like. And then if you say there are consequences, then there will be consequences. It's got to be that way. And then we start to dismantle it. All the stuff, you know, in terms of understanding how bias works, how stereotypes work, is critical, because actually we all do it. That kind of training and development, so people understand what they are doing when they are doing it, and the impact of what they're doing when they're doing it, is actually the very first stage for an organisation to be done. You have to understand yourself before you can start dismantling or addressing it. When you really understand the nature of the beast, you can start dealing with it.
Oh, beautiful. I love the note that you ended on. You know, it's about informing and affecting our own behaviors before we can then have influence on others and understanding our impact. And then I also heard you say accountability. People need to understand the expectations. We need to hold them accountable to that and follow through on the consequences. And otherwise we're not going to get anywhere. And any initiative, any effort is going to fail because people know that you're not meaning what you say. So thank you for that. Now, I know in my opening comments, I said we're just scratching the surface, and we are. I know we could dig so much deeper in these conversations, but we are coming to the close of our time. So I'd like to finish as I did with the previous group, starting with Shona, then Sarah and Elaine. What is your closing words of wisdom, your big takeaway that you want to make sure people come away with?
So I'm going to use another quote, which is, "Traveller, there is no path, the path is made by walking." Sometimes it can feel sort of paralyzing to feel there's so much to be done and I don't even know where to start. Sometimes just start. Just start.
I like that. Sarah?
I would wrap up with organizational culture is key. It's not an option. It's the core of what diversity work really is.
Thank you. Elaine?
And I would just say, you know, when you start, because actually I was going to say exactly what Shona said, just get on with it, just do it. But when you do it with purpose and do it with intention and be intentional and understand that on the route there will be, you know, there will be disappointments and there will be setbacks, and that's no reason to stop. You see it all the time. People say, well, we did that and that's what happened. Well, that's what happens. You do it, you get on with it. You keep on going.
I like that. Just do it, start, keep going. Beautiful. Thank you, ladies, for your time with us and sharing. And while we transition into our final panel for this evening, just a reminder, if you would want to share with us what diversity, equity, and inclusion means to you, that would be fantastic. We'd love to hear from you and engage in some dialogue in the chat. And then to our panelists, to those that have shared their thoughts with us already, you know, I know you mentioned several resources, quotes, and things that were important to you. So if you would be willing to share those in the chat as resources for our participants, that would be fantastic. And as we welcome Paul and Bobby and Jennifer, I will make some formal introductions. So we have Jennifer Esperanza, who is Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Coopera Consulting here in the States, based in Des Moines, Iowa. And she is passionate and committed to advocating for underserved populations with a particular focus on improving financial and social inclusion for minorities. She is a cultural anthropologist and joined Coopera from the academic world. So she has over 20 years of history of work and research and teaching experience on the intersections of economics and power. She's skilled in qualitative data analysis, cultural translation, group facilitation, and mentorship. So welcome, Jennifer. We are so happy to have you here with us. And also joining us is Paul Norgrove, CEO of Serve and Protect Credit Union. And he also serves on the ABCUL Board of Directors and has been very engaged and was a founding member of the Young Professionals Network, and is a 2014 recipient of the World Young Credit Union Professional Award, and is very engaged both professionally and on a volunteer basis with credit union initiatives both in the UK and globally. So welcome, Paul. And we also have Mr. Bobby Gould, who is, did I pronounce that correctly? I hope, Director of Client Services with CUDE. And CUDE is the UK's preeminent insurance specialist for credit unions, dedicated to serving credit unions in the UK for over 30 years. And I know, Bobby, you are very engaged with ABCUL, and we're going to talk a little bit about the work that you are doing around inclusion there. So welcome. We are so glad to have you here. And then rejoining us, and Renee, I see you there. We don't see you on camera, so I'm not sure if that's a technical difficulty, but also welcoming back Renee Sadie-White to the conversation.
You can't see me, but I can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. That's the important part. So, my friends, as we come into our final discussion for the evening, we've talked about the many layers of diversity. I use the iceberg analogy. And there's also a need, as we discussed with Roxana, about greater representation in our organizations. And we talk about representation often from the perspective of race and ethnicity, as well as gender, but there's many other layers to diversity of thought, diversity of experience and skills, and that such change and evolution within our organization really needs to be deliberate. And I would go so far as to say, you know, this is who we are as credit unions. It's part of our uniqueness. It's part of our mission, part of our why in terms of what we do. So I'd really like to have a discussion around, you know, what does this look like? And Jennifer, I'm going to start with you. You know, many of the initiatives that we hear about, that we've seen, happen in a very reactive way. We've talked about the murder of George Floyd. We've talked about issues around the pandemic, and action and conversation is a result of people responding to that. So, you know, what do you see roadblocks and barriers to action, and how do we shift the narrative from being reactive to being proactive in how we move forward?
Yes, thanks. Excellent question, Alison. Thank you. You know, when it comes to roadblocks and barriers, I kind of see three main things here. The first is that there is a misperception, I think, when it comes to thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion. There's a misperception that our workplace culture and the processes and the products affiliated with them are somehow neutral. And we really need to unlearn what we perceive as universal or neutral and really think about in which ways these practices or these processes were created to benefit a particular demographic. In this credit union movement, we have to think about the kinds of conversations we have with members regarding things like home loans. Oftentimes there is a assumption that these loans are for single family homes, and yet it really does leave out conversations for many immigrant families, for many families that may be multi-generational, in which there's more than one family living there under one roof, where more than 2 adults could be contributing to the mortgage. When we think about a workplace culture, there's that sort of neutrality of a culture of no pain, no gain, that somehow we approach our workers with not thinking about their personal lives or the situations, that somehow there is no, no room to talk about our personal situations. And the pandemic has shown us that there have been many ways that we have been able to integrate our personal lives, our health matters into our everyday work, that we are, completing our tasks in very creative and unconventional ways. A second barrier, I would say, to DEI work is this, idea that I'm afraid to offend someone. I'm afraid, I don't know what to do or what to say. And I would have to say here that I think we need to focus on the persons we are serving and not on our own egos. So this is the kind of work that asks for us to take a stance of humility and to be okay with making mistakes. If we do offend, we need to be able to take that stance of humility and to be open to learning and to ask ourselves, ask others to help us learn better and to do better. And then lastly, a misperception is that the responsibility of DEI work is designated to one person or a particular group of people. I think it's it's all of our responsibilities to be able to learn about the issues and to enact them to the extent that we know. And everyone is a stakeholder. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jennifer. No, I love how you brought up the topic of humility. And I mean, there is a fear factor of, I want to do something, but I don't want to sound stupid, look stupid, offend somebody in my efforts. So being able to put our egos aside and have that vulnerability to just step into, to lean into that opportunity and that discussion is so important. And you brought something up towards the end about often DEI efforts are the responsibility of one person. And I kind of want to bring up and hear from you on the topic of tokenism, because more often than not, it is the African American, it is the LGBTQ individual, it's someone that the organization identifies as an underrepresented group and then expects and assigns them to lead this initiative. So I'm curious to hear from you on how you see tokenism and the impact it has on DEI and what credit unions, what organizations should be doing, should be asking.
Right, good question. So I think that for myself, somebody who had been in academia for 17 years, experienced tokenism, on a regular basis. I was often called upon to lead discussions or to moderate panels on issues regarding diversity, and yet, my skill set in doing anthropology, linguistics as well, and economics, I wasn't called upon to be an expert on those things. And so I think we need to ask ourselves questions about who do we envision as the expert? Are there particular demographics of people that we have in our minds unconsciously that we see as the expert, and who are we leaving out? So this requires us to do really rigorous work in unlearning what some of our biases are and finding opportunities for people who perhaps they may be the only ones representing a diverse demographic at the moment, but finding ways for them to grow professionally and to take on leadership responsibilities in a way that is sincere, and not to just be relegated as somebody to represent a diverse group only as needed. I think they really need to be integrated fully into leadership teams and to be acknowledged for the particular insights that they contribute to the entire operations of the organization, as opposed to just this one little task that needs to be accomplished.
Oh, thank you for that, and I completely agree. Now, I want to transition over to Bobby and Paul. I'll let you guys kind of flip a coin as to who wants to lead off on this question. But Paul's volunteering you, Bobby. ABCUL has engaged in some work around inclusion, and you have a defined group that has been, talking about this. So what was the impetus for bringing this group together? And what type of conversations have come out of that to this point? You've been in existence about a year, if I understand correctly. So can you give us a little bit of history on the group and the work that you're doing?
Yes, thanks, Alison. So I guess ABCUL as a trade body and the lead trade association representing credit unions in Great Britain have always, in my view, as somebody outside of the organisation, struck a great balance between representing their members and leading by example. And I know that the conversation amongst the ABCUL board and the directors of ABCUL had been going on for some time about the particular challenges around the succession planning for directors on the ABCUL board. And I think for that period of time, it's been a discussion that's been ongoing. It was recognised that part of the challenge is how do we make sure that our board of directors are representative of our membership and of our members' membership as well. So that initiative was taken forward by the board to actually, rather than try and solve, I think we've heard enough today about how this is a journey. It's not something that you start and then solve. They wanted to have they wanted to be able to create a group that was able to take this particular issue and inform the ABCUL board with the latest learnings and keep that ongoing. So that board, that group has been set up with the particular terms of reference, with set terms for the representatives on the group, and with the view to making recommendations to the ABCUL board that ensures that the importance of diversity, equity and inclusion is reflected on the development, recruitment and the activities of the ABCUL board. And we have been running for a year now. There's been a significant proportion of that time which has been spent on educating ourselves really, and reaching out to experts in the field and having them come and address us and help us shape how best we can deliver on the challenge that the board has set for this group, which is to build this as part and parcel of ABCUL's, if you like, operating model for the future.
Great. Paul, I'm coming to you. So as a young professional, as someone who was a founder of the YP network, as one of the youngest board members of ABCUL, I would love to hear from your perspective on the work that you're engaging in and how you're representing your credit union in addressing that issue of representation.
Yeah, thank you for bringing me in on that one, Alison. I think it's, if I take a history lesson and go back to my first ever ABCUL board meeting, and Roxana said something earlier when she walked in the room and she was the only visible Muslim woman. Well, it was only 2013 where I walked in, I was the only one who had hair that wasn't grey, or, there was a genuine lack of young people in credit union systems back in 2013. And I remember, as most good conversations I had in the conference bar, someone in the industry saying, you can't possibly think that about credit unions, you don't have enough experience, or a comment that's been used before, we haven't paid your dues. I was like, maybe not, but I think it's a good idea. And really, that just kind of lit a fire after that point that I was going to prove that individual wrong. And in the process, where possible, and it's something I'm really passionate about, if you can use your voice or profile for good, it can't just be good for you. So if I'm going to create an environment where I belong as a 29-year-old at the time, or now mid-30s and looking much older now as COVID beard exists, but if I can create an environment that I can fit in, then I need to foster that to extend to other groups who might be young as well, and also might have other things. And over time, we've managed to do that. So the YPN was a great example that we started that to sort of galvanize the young professional network, to recognize our own differences. And what you tend to find is most young professionals have a wider range of diversity just because of the generational aspect of it. There just is more young professionals who look different, talk different, walk different, everything. To really create that environment. And then, like Bobby said, and I think Sarah said about creating systems that create results, and Chad also talked about the need to take action. It didn't happen like that. We started it in 2018. By 2020, we had 60 young professionals all involved in the network with lots of face-to-face events. Some people here that I recognize from the movement who know other people that helped us out for free, and came in and created this environment for young professionals. But then the action happened. There's now 2 young professional network founders who got onto the Trade Association board. So it took 3 years, but we got there. And we're not there just because we're young. I don't like nepotism, and I don't like shadow boards or focus groups that have no real remit or accountability or responsibility. We're there on merit. And we offer, at times, I think, a better perspective on credit unions of today because they're more relevant to us today. It's not disrespecting the legacy and the co-founders and everything there, but we need that diverse thought. And that's what happens when you take action and commit to something. It might not be obvious. We didn't set out with the mission to infiltrate or break down the system to get young people on the board or anything like that. This is a byproduct of taking positive action to create an environment where people feel, like Shona said, they can just be themselves and allow themselves to be successful in whatever they choose to do. So I hope that answered your question. I know we're conscious of time, and I'll talk all day on that issue, but yeah, I'll throw it back to you.
You brought up you brought up a good point, and I know your credit union is very unique in terms of serve and protect. You serve a very male-dominated industry, but as your credit union has grown and expanded, you've added new health-related groups to your field of membership. So when we talk about representation and being reflective of our membership, what has that meant for you at Serve and Protect?
It's a really, really good point. And I hope none of my board of directors are tuning in, because it's something that's got to be in my bonnet. And I was fortunate enough to speak about this a few years ago in Washington. There is a real correlation between leadership and membership and leadership. They go backwards and forwards. So if you want to change your membership or attract a different membership, you need to change your leadership, and vice versa. Now, credit unions are unique, but we share the same name. So my credit union was founded by the police, for the police, and some of our directors would still say just for the police, as much as they welcome other markets, because that's their identity, right? So identity sits with us as individuals. So we look in the mirror, we talk, and we say, I'm from Birmingham in the UK, and I'm this and I'm that. It's my identity. Different credit unions, and Elaine shared that their credit union had its own identity. Our identity was representative of the membership in the 1980s, which was a male industry, predominantly white, and the police is still predominantly male, still predominantly white, but to our borders as well. But over time, we've extended to different markets now, and we're really fortunate now to have quite a visionary chair at what I would say is a point where he's in the twilight of his career. He doesn't need, when you're at the twilight of your career, you don't need to take on challenges that make you unpopular or try and make change, because you can retire to the cabin, right? But he's really into the governance review, making sure that we've got appropriate representation of skills, the diversity. So that sort of became our project as a credit union, is to look at why we've got the governance structure we've got. We don't need to boot people off to create room. We just need to foster change, which is going to take time. So we've introduced things like term limits, which was scary. And if I'd have said that 3 years ago, the room would have said, no, we're not going to do term limits. We'll lose all the good directors. No, we just put term limits in so we can find better ones in the future. But, you know, it is a journey, and I know that's been said a few times, but us as a credit union, for example, operationally, we wanted a younger demographic of membership. The average age of our senior leadership team is 40. So the 7 of us, and the average age is 40. And our average age, Bobby and CUDE did some work for us during the last 4 years since we've had that structure in place. We've got more members join us between the age of 18 and 30 than we've ever had. That's our biggest growth area. And there is a relationship between leadership and membership, whatever you do, because you naturally create that culture because it oozes out of you. You can't help it. Everywhere we go and look and touch is us, and we're leaving our fingerprints on it. So again, it comes down to having leadership that believe in it. And if they don't, challenge them to believe in it. Because what's the worst that can happen? You don't move as quickly as you want, but you'll still be taking a step forward. And I loved what Elaine said at the end, where she was like, just get on with it. That's what we've got to do. We've just got to make a start.
Thank you. I'm writing that down. If there's a theme between all of these, and it's just get on with it, and I love it. Renee, I'd like to, come to you. You started us off. You've been able to hear this collective dialogue, and what are the consequences of not acting? If we just like DE&I, it's not for me, or I don't feel like it's something our organization needs to worry about. What's that mean for us as an industry?
First, I have to say, SES, Sarah, Elaine, and Shona, oh my God. Organizational culture, intentional, keep it going, just start. Oh my God, like what a powerful panel that was, right? And we're all like, wow. And Jennifer's just spouting off, yes, yes, girl, yes. And I'm listening to Bobby and I'm listening to Paul like, yes, 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 I'm excited, I'm excited, I'm excited. If we don't change up, we will be distinct like the dinosaurs. And there is no Jurassic Park that's going to resurrect us. We will just go the way of the dinosaur. We will be extinct. If we don't take a hard look at our youth, our younger professionals, if we don't take a look at our boards, if we don't change our bylaws that say you cannot be a board of director until you end your life, until life is ended for you. We really need to be proactive. We noticed at AACUC, the African American Credit Coalition, that the youngest people in leadership and on the board, we were turning 60. And so I was one of those people. And I'm happy to say that we have some new directors in, and it was slow getting there. And I too, like you, Paul, I hope my directors aren't listening, but it was a turnover, and it is a journey. And so if you do not embrace DEI, and I'm okay with you not embracing DEI, okay? I'm really okay with you not embracing it, but you have to know it's not going to go away. It is here to stay. The look and feel of your country has changed. Wherever country you are, it has changed. Because we have flight now, because people visit, they do other things, and they learn to love each other, they learn to see each other. So as we are getting more integrated as society continues, DEI cannot go away, because we're not going to be segregated anymore. We're coming together even more and more and more. And so from that perspective, if you don't look at how you can make your credit union better, your SACO better, then you're just going to fall apart. You will cease to exist. So it's not, if people say, oh, it's a business case, and oh, it's a personal, it's all of that. It's not just one thing. and everybody's at a different place in their journey. So don't look at someone who's doing it really, really well and being upset because you guys don't look like you're doing it that well at first. As Paul said, he said 2014, I think he said, no, 2013. He said 2013, but it wasn't until 2018 that they did something. So know that it's a journey, but know that it's important. If you don't do anything and stick your head in the sand, you're gonna end up with no sand and no head.
I love Renee. Learn to love each other, learn to see each other. And then my other phrase that everyone's reiterated is just get on with it. And if we don't, then we're not here anymore. So, I mean, there's no other impetus for that than just our own self-preservation. So I know we're coming to the close of our time. This has gone way too fast. So one final question to each of you, and I'll start with you, Jennifer. What does success look like?
What does success look like? Success looks like having a board, having a membership that is as close as it can get to the demographics of the community it serves, and hopefully in the nation that it serves. You know, as Renee has said, right, you know, this is not going away. If we look at census data, we are increasingly diverse, and we need our leadership and our practices to be able to reflect that. And that, yeah, that our success also hinders upon us asking questions and taking that stance of humility, as I had said earlier, not assuming that we have all the answers, or that the set of practices that we had put in place a decade, 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago or more, are still, you know, functional, that somehow, you know, everyone should get on board. I think it's up to us to listen to what people want.
Thank you. Bobby.
Thanks, Alison. I was really taken with what Renee said there, because it made me think about the war for talent that credit unions face all the time. And it also made me think about the fact that the level by which people are prepared to accept exclusion reduces the younger you get, the younger age group that you talk to. So the younger people are much more not prepared to accept any form of exclusion of any sort. Just like they also want to make sure that the organisations that they deal with are ethical, that are not harming the environment, much more keen to make sure that those things are the case than as you go up into older generations, including my generation. So actually, it's going to be critical to the success of credit unions, because if they're going to hire talented people, they're going to have to create cultures that are inclusive. They're going to have to create environments where the best talent in the future generations want to work. And that means they're going to have to tick all those boxes. It's not going to be a nice thing to have. It's going to be the table stakes. It's going to be what you need to get in the door. And I want to sort of, I guess, raise a challenge to credit unions here in Great Britain without comment, with some statistics. ABCUL did a survey recently of credit union membership, and some of the areas that it highlighted are pretty important, I think. So they are this: 26% of credit union members are under the age of 35, and 3% of directors are under the age of 35. 10% of members are over the age of 65, and 32% of directors are over the age of 65. Look, we don't need to move the needle and swing it entirely the other way, but we all have to take ownership there and say, well, how can we try and readdress the balance? And I think organisations will be more successful, more innovative, and deliver better services for their members and the communities that they serve if they try and tackle some of those imbalances.
Thank you. You can't argue with statistics. You can try, but it tells an important story. Paul.
Success for me is that we're not sat here in 10 years' time having the same conversation. That's the big deal for me. I think we're not going to fix it in 12 months' time or 2 years' time, but we should be getting even better each year. So each year that we should feel the change. The change will be statistical on some level because it will be measured or whatever, but it'll feel the change. Like the less people we have who walked in a room like I did, or Roxana walked in a room like she did and felt like they didn't belong, you know, it's creating and fostering those environments that everybody has a right to be at, everybody feels included. And I love Bobby's point about the younger generation. I believe it, you know. My school class wasn't all the same. You know, it's just the nature of the modern world. And I think some of the change will come because the generations are coming through. But we also need for people to open doors and know when it's time to pass over what we all love, which is credit unions. But, you know, at some point we need to pass on the mantle to the next generation. But yeah, so long as we're not here in 10 years' time, it's good.
Yeah, I'm going to put a challenge out and say, as long as we're not still having this conversation in a year, that we can see that we've moved the needle and we see change happening. Renee.
My answer was the same as Paul's. No more of these conversations. But I will add this. I was watching Joel Osteen this morning, and his sermon was on if you knew, if you only knew. So if you knew that in 10 years we wouldn't have to have these conversations, what would you do differently? If you knew. So if you knew that we could eradicate racism throughout the globe, what would you do differently? So I say, I try not to miss out on anything. I try to do the right thing all the time. So when you try to do it that way, you don't have to worry about if you knew. I operate in that anyway. When people tell me no, I think not now. So we may not have done anything right now, but I see we're doing it. Paul, I'm inspired by you. Jennifer, I'm inspired by you. Oh my God. And Alison, I'm always inspired by you. Bobby, I can't wait to get to know you to get more inspired. It is being together with one another that is going to make us have success. Can you give grace to the person who's sitting next to you? Can you understand the person sitting next to you? Can you not be offended when someone walks in? I used to just hate to see people with tattoos and piercings, but now I am a 60-year-old woman, and I have to really lean into it and see it as, now I'm starting to learn the language. Oh, I like your ink. So being more intentional about being inclusive. That's what I'll leave you with. Being more intentional about being inclusive. If you knew that we could solve, if you knew, what would you do?
Thank you, Renee, for bringing us full circle. And I love that. I love that journey. I think every generation has that moment of, we just need to get over ourselves and those biases and misperceptions so we can just all be together and give each other grace. Well, we are coming to time. We are whittling away our Q&A, but a few final thoughts. You know, we've discussed that DEI, it's critical. It's critical to the sustainability of the credit union movement, to society. It is critical to who we are and how we exist. And it's a strategic imperative, and it's a strategic advantage as credit unions. I mean, this is who we are. It's part of our DNA, and we really need to lean into that. So before we move into Q&A, I want to close with a poem. I was reading that I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and for Black History Month, they came home with this poem, and it really resonated as I was preparing for today. So it's called The Crayon Box That Talked. It says, while walking in a toy store the day before today, I overheard a crayon box with many things to say. I don't like red, said yellow, and green said, nor do I. And no one here likes orange, but no one knows just why. We are a box of crayons that doesn't get along, said blue to all the others. Something here is very wrong. Well, I bought that box of crayons and took it home with me and laid out all the crayons so the crayons could all see. They watched me as I colored with red and blue and green, and black and white and orange and every color in between. They watched as green became the grass and blue became the sky. The yellow sun was shining bright on white clouds drifting by. Colors changing as they touched, becoming something new. They watched me as I colored. They watched me till I was through. And when I finally finished, I began to walk away. And as I did, the crayon box had something more to say. I do like red, said yellow, and green said, I do too. And blue, you were terrific. So high up in the sky. We are a box of crayons, each one of us unique. But when we get together, the picture is complete. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Alan and open up for some Q&A. If we can bring all of our panelists back, please. So don't be shy. If you have a question, please drop that in the chat. Or even if it's not a question, if there's something you want to share, something that really resonated, an aha moment.
Okay. Can you see the questions, Alison? Because I can't.
I don't, yeah, let's see. I'm not seeing any questions right now.
There isn't any questions that have been put in, just comments saying thank you. The poem was amazing. I love that. Thank you, Renee from LA. That said, there's good description, Bobby. There's quite a few that, like I said, nice little comments, but no questions as such, but I'll keep my eye on them.
Okay. So shall we bring ourselves to a conclusion then, Alison? Shall we?
Yes, and I'll say one thing, if it wasn't seen in the chat, we had some technical difficulties earlier. For those of you that were on the call and couldn't hear us, you understand that. So we'll make sure that the recording is available and also share out our opening video from Elyssa, McCarter, LaBorde, the new president and CEO of World Council. So Alan, yes, please.
Yes.
Please close us out.
Oh, thanks, Alison. Viewers, I feel we've all gained something from today's webinar. And thanks to all 35 credit unions that attended today. Let's all start on a journey. Now, our next instalment's on the 30th of January 2022 on the theme of blue sky thinking. This will be about new products and ways of working in collaboration with others. This will stream from the expected changes to the Credit Union Act, which is still in Parliament. And Robert might have a few words about that. It's sunny in Glasgow, I noticed, Robert.
Yeah, indeed, it may be an indication of the weather for next July. I have no idea. I can't promise anything, but just to thank everyone again for their contributions. And I know that we had some technical difficulties at the start. I'm going to suggest that was my best opening remarks ever, since there was only a few people that heard them. But we will endeavour to get the video out and the recording. Just to thank everyone for their participation. In terms of the next session, yeah, as Alan mentioned, we are right in the midst of talking to regulators and legislators at the moment around a much needed legislative reform programme that will revolutionise the legislative environment for credit unions across the UK. That will be a game changer for our sector in terms of new products, new services, new ways of interacting with the existing member base, but also the new generation of members that we need to attract. And I think today's discussion, there's a big focus on how DEI resonates with younger people and that ethical view, the value-based, the value proposition that we're so embedded to as organisations, as credit unions. And so I think it's been hugely inspiring today. I want to thank everyone for their time, for their inputs, for their inspirational views, for their willingness to be honest. I think there's been a huge amount of candour and honesty. Yeah. And also people have put themselves in a very deliberate, vulnerable position to talk honestly about their experiences. And I think based on that, that's the only way we'll ever achieve the change that we're looking for. And so, yeah, let's ensure that we're not, the next fireside chat around DEI, or the next sessions that we do, are about the improvements that we've made and the journey, the progress that we've made on that journey. It's been hugely inspiring to me. As always, when credit union people, friends, colleagues, credit union family get together, something special happens. And today's been no different. So I want to thank everyone from the bottom of my heart, from everyone at ABCUL, from the team, from Alan and Ian, who have inspired us to do these sessions in the first place, to Alison's flawless approach today in the midst of lots of technical challenges. A huge well done, Alison. And for everybody that's been involved, thank you. You have many friends in the UK and the British movement. And if we can ever do anything to push forward your agendas across the world, then we're happy to do so. Thank you, everyone.
So thank you, Robert, and good morning, good afternoon, good night, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Lots more comments coming in. So thank you for a wonderful session. Proud to be part of this movement. And thank you to the speakers and the forum. It was amazing. And everybody loved the poem, Alison.
That's super.
Well,
thank you, Elaine.
great.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Bella. It's been terrific. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah. And thank you, Jackie, for working through all of that. Have a great week, everyone.
Okay. Thank you. Catch up soon.